Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hims House. Before we get into the episode with Adam May, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our flagship partner, Goodell Terminal. People have tried to build a Bloomberg killer for years, but I think Goodell might actually pull it off. They're just getting started, but what they've already built delivers 90% of Bloomberg's functionality at less than 10% of the price. It's a full trading terminal for $80 a month. I use it daily to track short interest, institutional ownership, analyst ratings, and more. If you want access to the data powering Hims House, sign up today and get 25% off your first month. The link to sign up and get that deal is in the show notes below. Here's our conversation with Adam May. Hims House, episode 36. I'm Jonathan Stern. I'm here as always with Patrick Lester, who goes by the name Bayside in the Hims House Discord. We're joined today by Adam May, doctor, biotech investor, and probably the most bearish Hims voice ever to make an appearance on the Hims House podcast. Adam has long been skeptical of Hims and specifically Hims' approach to selling GLP-1s. Back in January, after the Super Bowl commercial was announced, he called Hims a parasitic loser. He went on to short the stock officially a few weeks later on February 19th, claiming that by continuing to sell GLP-1s, Hims was stealing Novo Nordisk's intellectual property. Interestingly, he went long the stock right after the Novo Nordisk Hims deal was announced, saying probably the deal isn't huge for Hims revenue/bottom line, but it does a lot to remove the litigation risks discussed in a short thesis. I don't know the exact dates, but at some point he closed out that long position and went short again. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, as we're recording this with you today, you are currently short Hims. So there's the journey. I have to say, Adam, it's incredible to me that Hims is up close to 100% in 2025. You've been short for most of the year, at least a good chunk of the year, and yet have still made money, possibly a lot of it. So I wanted to acknowledge that first and simply say very well done timing the tops and the bottoms. And I would be remiss not to mention this because it is Monday, June 23rd. We had some blockbuster news this morning. Just this morning, Novo Nordisk terminated the deal it had with Hims over what they're calling illegal mass compounding. The stock is, of course, down some 30% on that news. We're excited to dig into all of this and hear about how you're thinking about Hims today. Adam May, welcome to Hims House.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for the intro. And there have been some good timed trades, long and short. Some definite luck involved in parts of that for sure. But it's a volatile stock, so it's been a good one to trade.
So even though we disagree on Hims, we wanted to get you on the show for a while now, simply because your background gives you a potential edge, I think, in analyzing a company like Hims. We don't have to spend too long on this, but you're a doctor and a biotech investor. Tell us a little bit about that to start and how it's shaped your view on Hims.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I've been investing in biotech for a little over a decade now. And I was doing a lot of that during my medical training. And so while I was still in medical school and about to enter residency, I'd had kind of a pretty strong track record in my personal account over that time. And I had a very close friend who was about to go to Stanford for business school, for the graduate school of business out of Stanford. And he kind of approached me and was like, do you want to try to formalize this investing thing that you're doing and start an account with an official track record that you really keep track? And maybe I make connections out on the West Coast that we can kind of parlay that into something bigger someday, like thinking of an investment fund. And so my friend and I decided to kind of formalize our biotech investing process and officially track our records. And over the course of about a year and a half, we returned a little over 1,300% and got way more momentum than we expected. A lot of that was beta, a lot of luck with just kind of a rising tide in the biotech market, but there was some alpha in there as well. But kind of we got more momentum for launching a fund much earlier than we thought. So through his Stanford connections, my friend got us in touch with Tiger Management, who was kind of famous for seeding hedge funds, some of the biggest hedge funds in the world. I think Martin Shkreli talked about how he started off at a Tiger Cub. And so Tiger's model is they had been kind of their own hedge fund for a long time and were very successful, but then they changed their model to seeding, giving the first investment to hedge funds. And so we were talking to them as just hoping to get advice, but they made us sort of a unique deal where we were not a Tiger seed, but they were giving us a small amount of capital relative to them to kind of have a trial run in running a fund. And if we performed well, then we could become a Tiger seed through Tiger. And so I was still a medical student graduating to become a resident. And we told them, like, my friend Joe, he's not going to drop out of Stanford. I'm not going to drop out of my residency to do this. So if you guys really want us to run this fund, we're going to be doing it in our spare time, basically. And so we raised about $12 million to run. And we launched in early 2021, which if you look back at the biotech indices is like the all-time dramatic peak of the biotech market. And so I was kind of managing that fund. It was called Rare Life Capital. Ran it for about a year, and the biotech indices max drawdown over that period of time was about 60%. And our fund was a little bit levered long and wasn't down quite 60%. So sort of in a way we outperformed, but with a 50% drawdown as a fledgling hedge fund, you cannot have anything sustainable with that. So we closed that down. We actually didn't have any redemptions, but shut that down about a year after running it. Since then, I've consulted for some biotech hedge funds, and even like once I got done with residency, invested full time in small cap, mostly pre-revenue biotechs. So that's where I am now. By training, I'm a dermatologist, and I have started recently seeing some patients actually. So I'm kind of doing a part-time medicine, part-time biotech investing at this stage. That's like my background. I've spent a ton of time analyzing biotech companies, and because of that, pharmaceutical companies as well, because that's often who these biotech companies are competing against. And nothing has been hotter in biotech and pharma over the last couple of years than obesity. And so I've spent a lot of time understanding the obesity market, understanding the drugs that are currently approved for it, knowing what's in the pipeline and all of that. So maybe that's a little more long-winded than it should have been, but that's kind of like my bona fides.
Yeah, awfully helpful. And I was going to ask if you're practicing at all. And so it's cool to hear that you're sort of back doing a little bit of dermatology. What would you say is the breakdown of your time? Is it mostly investing, mostly practicing medicine, or about half and half?
Close to half. Close to half and half. And until recently, over the last year plus, it's been exclusively investing.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So let's shift to Hims. As I mentioned during the intro, your view has shifted at least a couple times in the last 5-6 months. You started off short, briefly went long, and now you're back on the short side. Take us through how your thesis on Hims has evolved, what led you to those changes in perspective, and where do you stand today?
Well, my first short entry was a little bit unfair just because it was in the middle of a short squeeze. I mean, my depth of knowledge at the company at the first time I shorted it was not as deep as it normally would be. And that was with the knowledge that I was going to short it in the middle of a short squeeze and hold it white knuckle for a few days if I needed to, with pretty high confidence that it was going to come back down just because the chart had gone parabolic. So kind of a counter momentum short, basically. And I knew.
Do you remember your entry price?
It was $72 a share, which I posted on Twitter in real time. So I could make that up, but I'm not.
I think it only hit 72 like the morning, like 10 minutes before the news came out that, what was it? The semaglutide was going off shortage. Is that right? Or did you enter a few days before that?
So it was a few days before the shortage discontinuation was announced.
Okay.
And it was squeezing, and I think it hit 72.80.
Maybe it touched 72 and like retraced to 68 and then popped back up to 72.
I never closed at 72.
Okay.
I think the all-time high was like 72.80 or something like that. But yeah, I did. There are receipts online. Okay, so that was definitely luck, and I did not hold it for a very long period of time. I covered with like a 10% gain or something like that in the mid 60s, probably the next day. But then it was a couple days later that the Novo news broke that it technically was not Novo who broke the news, but the FDA broke the news that the shortage of semaglutide was over. Yeah. And I had been following that. I mean, that was important for other investments, but I, of course, knew what that meant for Hims. And in the Hims and Novo earnings calls that had shortly preceded that, both had alluded to the possibility that the shortage could last throughout the entire year. In retrospect, Novo was being vague, saying that they will have supply constraints throughout 2025. What they meant is that in parts of the world, they will have shortage of semaglutide throughout 2025, not in the United States. The US is the last market that you're going to short because it's the most lucrative. So it was, in my opinion, the shortage resolved faster than people had expected because both companies had been kind of talking along the lines of this could go on for the rest of the year. And so I shorted again, and that worked out well. Kind of in and out shorts kind of during this period of time, also because there was a lot of volatility going on in the market in general. So there would be some days where like the NASDAQ would be down 2%. And typically Hims kind of behaves as a 3 to 4x lever of whatever the NASDAQ is doing. If it's up 1, Hims is up 4. If it's down 2, then Hims is down 10. And there were a couple days where that disconnect was really striking, where maybe Hims would be up a couple percent and the NASDAQ would be down quite a bit. And then, just to hedge the rest of my portfolio, it's kind of an obvious thing to short. And so a lot of it during that initial phase was understanding the background of Hims a little bit, not as deep as I do at this stage, but also using it as a trading mechanism.
Tell us about why you went long.
Yeah, so it's kind of the first time that I shared my bearish take in depth on X. A lot of it focused on legal risks. And the most ominous legal risk at the time to me seemed like that from Novo Nordisk, especially with this like personalized dosing, but also in regards to some of the marketing that Hims has done.
Yeah, and specifically, you called out, I think, the Super Bowl ad, and then there was a bit about Novo Nordisk as well.
Yes, definitely had both like emotional and legitimate problems with that. I mean, I don't like the way that they like denigrate the system that like discovered the drug that they're using. The drug that wouldn't exist without, quote unquote, the system that they're looking at as a negative thing, but that's kind of an aside. So a lot of my bear thesis at that time was largely legal risk related. And then the stock was trading at like 28, 29 on the day that out of nowhere, Novo Nordisk announces this partnership with Hims. Like a legitimate one, like not like the Eli Lilly one where it was kind of like, oh, they're selling a drug and Lilly has to say, we don't know these guys. It was a real partnership. Basically for Novo to use Hims as a DTC intermediary to sell real patented branded Wegovy. And so I mean, my thesis was wrong at that stage, and I have no problem like not only admitting that, but a further step than admitting when you're wrong, I think, is actually acting on it and making your portfolio reflect that. So I fortunately was not short at that time, and I also posted in real time when I covered my shorts. I was not short at that time, and I went long like in the pre-market immediately. I didn't waste any time at all. And the stock was already up a fair amount. I looked back today and my entry was like 35.50, something like that. But it rocketed from there. I mean, it was a multi-day sustained rally. And actually, I mean, into today, I think you could pretty much call that all one rally. I don't think it really took much of a breather between that like $28 open and where it was set to open today before the news at around 64. But I covered shortly after the convertible offering was announced, somewhere in the mid 50s, and got short again in the 60s here very recently. So So yeah, my
And final piece there, because like no real news in between the going long and short. Was it just a valuation disconnect, or what led you to go from long to short rather than just like long to no position?
like this most recent time.
Why are you short in the 60s?
Yeah, valuation again. It's very expensive, and we can definitely have a talk about like the revenue multiples and stuff like that. But I think it's the valuation is extended.
Great. I know we have some more specific questions on GLP-1s. We'd probably like to dive into exactly why you were short, so I'll turn it over to Bayside for that.
Sure. Hey, Adam, great chatting with you. One of the interesting things for me as an aside is I think both Jonathan and I are seen appropriately as bulls, but I have been a trader on Hims, specifically in my IRA accounts. And it's interesting to hear you talk about the prices of where you went short, because pretty close to those same timing areas, I was doing very similar things. I never went short, but I would sell within my IRAs at the same time or around the same price that you were going short. So directionally, it was the same kind of move. So it's interesting to hear, and I think this probably brings value to this podcast, that even bears and bulls may disagree on the overall direction of the stock, but oftentimes their trades in given periods of time may actually be closer to each other directionally than they might otherwise seem. And in
Absolutely.
fact,
And that's another thing to point out is like there's short-term thesis and there's long-term thesis as well, right? And those can be extremely different.
I wish I could say I caught 72. I did not.
That was just luck, sheer luck at that.
And I got a little lucky last week getting out for a very different reason involving what's going on in the Middle East. But I'll take luck any day of the week.
Although,
all right,
not out entirely.
No. I for the record, and people in the Hims house know this, I have a core long position that's in taxable shares that I'm planning to hold on forever. So I'm talking about trading in a part of my position, which were in the IRAs, where I can get away with it because there's no tax consequences.
Yeah, doing that tax-free is brilliant. That's great.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into some legal stuff. You mentioned a little bit, about some of that would being, a strong piece of your thesis and why you were making some of the decisions you did. So, I mean, I've written a little bit about that topic, but I want to let you kind of share your views on this. This wasn't my first question necessarily on this line of inquiry, but given what happened today, let's talk a little bit about Novo and the litigation risk. I mean, we just had an announcement that their partnership came to an end today. It's not clear to me that Hims knew this was coming. Maybe they did, maybe they did not. They had some very strong language in their announcement, which suggested that Hims was engaged in illegal behavior. So that seems to be probably the very first thing we should chat about. What is your thinking about the legality with respect to what Hims is doing in semaglutide, and specifically what legal risk do you think is out there for Hims?
There's kind of a few different ways we can talk about it, like legality in respect to Novo Nordisk's patents, to how they advertise the medicine. But sticking with Novo today, I mean, that was like my original thought, was that Novo was going to have a problem with what Hims was doing with their personalized dosing, especially of Wegovy. And for a while, it looked like I was wrong about that. But this morning, that kind of gets turned back on its head. And I almost think that it's worse to have had the partnership and then break it off than to have never had the partnership at all. Like, I think that spells more trouble for Hims. This is Novo now taking positive action against Hims as opposed to just inaction. So the issue right now, as far as Novo's patents are concerned, is this loophole that Hims is using with this personalized dosing of Wegovy. And I mean, like, personalized in air quotes. They're using a loophole in compounding pharmacies that allows compounding pharmacies to make different doses, or in some other way, slightly different modifications to patented drugs, and sell them. And it's supposed to be used in really rare cases. Like the classic example is a cancer drug that is patented and FDA approved for treating adults, but like a tiny baby has this rare type of cancer and they need this drug. And so they can't take the tablet that's available on the market. A compounding pharmacy can easily make the same molecule, and they make it in a smaller dose for the baby. Another example is like these injectable medicines. They all have various other chemicals in them to like turn them into fluids, things called like excipients, for example. You may have an allergy, like a very rare case of a patient being allergic to one of the products in the medicine that is not the drug. And so a compounding pharmacy could make an injection of the drug without that excipient that the patient is allergic to, and they can then take it. So it's really meant for very specific cases. And tolerability is kind of one of these gray areas for it. And that's what Hims is hanging their hat on. They're saying we're going to find patients who cannot tolerate commercial doses of Wegovy, and we're going to give them slightly different doses, like minimum 10%. And they really can't be that different because there's so many different doses of Wegovy that are commercially approved, which is another one of the issues with Hims doing what they're doing. There's actually a lot of options for patients out there. There's 5 different approved doses that are actually all very close to each other in their dosing. And so like say it's 0.25, 0.5, 1, 1.7, and 2.4 milligrams. Those are the doses of Wegovy that are available. Say you don't tolerate the 1.7, what you should do is go down to the 1 milligram dose. And that is FDA approved, robustly studied, tens of thousands of patients who have done it. If you can't tolerate 1.7, go to 1.0. Hims will slide in and say, hey, how about 1.15 instead? They call that personalized. I mean, it's not, in my opinion, even personalized, because that's just another arbitrary dose. They don't have any information to say you're going to respond better to 1.15 than you are to 1.0. So personalized even kind of is a misnomer in my book. And Jonathan, look, you had something.
Yeah, just quickly, how many doses of Lilly's tirzepatide, branded tirzepatide, are there?
It's the same number: 2.5, 5, 7.5, 10, 15.
So 5.
Also 5. I was under the impression that there were more for Zepbound and Mounjaro.
I believe it's 5 as well. There may be exceptions in different indications. So I mean, these are being studied in like obstructive sleep apnea. You know, I mean, we always talk about the obesity and diabetes indications. And my understanding is that it's 5 dose levels for both. But this exception was never meant for somebody to be able to come in and say, we're going to make a patented drug at scale. It's meant for very rare cases. And people will say, well, there's no law against what they're doing. It's like the absence of a law of something that nobody ever thought that anybody was going to try to do, if that makes sense, right? Like there's no law that says you can't drive drunk on the moon because it's not a problem, right? Like it's assumed that it's not going to come up. So the legality of that is, in my opinion, the legality is questionable, but like the morality is the wrong word, but it's wrong. It is very clearly wrong, because you could do this with any medicine that's ever been made. Any patented drug that comes out and is $100,000 a year, even though it costs $50 to make it. Hims could say, well, we'll offer it to you for $1,000 a year because we can change the dose and get away with it. So it's a way that if it were adopted by other companies and for other medicines, it would completely obviate pharmaceutical intellectual property, which would lead to the end of new drug development. Pharmaceutical companies and new drugs do not exist unless there is protection to prevent people from copying their drug while it's on patent. So the personalized dosing thing is very frustrating to me because I truly think that it is bad. I think that it is wrong. Well,
it would affect the biotechs that you're invested in.
What's that?
Oh, it would affect the biotechs that you're invested in.
Absolutely. Sure. It would. If this was a sort of thing that were, done with other drugs and it became acceptable practice, then yeah, there would be no more biotech companies. There would be no reason to develop new drugs other than you want to cure disease. But I mean, if you guys want to donate all of your money to make that happen, feel free, but it won't happen. because you have to be able to make a profit on these things in order to develop them. And one more note about the personalized dosing tolerability loophole. I mean, if you read like Paul Serro's stuff on X, he has said, and I have not tested this, that you can go through the algorithm of answering the intake form on Hims and admit that you've never taken one of these, but say you have trouble with like upset stomach and diarrhea and stuff, and still get suggested to have one of these. I mean, that is wrong to begin with, because how can you say you didn't tolerate a GLP-1 if you've literally never taken one before? So that shows that it's wrong kind of on its face. But let's say that you do start a branded GLP-1 and you have some GI upset. That alone, or even vomiting, that does not qualify as not tolerating the medication. So the rates of things like GI upset were around 40-45% in the original Wegovy studies. The key is that these side effects, the GI side effects, are transient, and they're experienced almost exclusively during the dose titration phase. So while you're taking the higher and higher escalating doses of the medicine, that is whenever you experience the side effects. So if you say one day I had an upset stomach while I was taking it, that does not equate not tolerating it, because the data very clearly show that if you continue on the medicine, that side effect goes away. And those data are available in the supplemental appendices of the New England Journal of Medicine studies. The curve is very clear. The side effects happen at the beginning and they go straight down after really like 2 or 3 weeks. So just saying I had upset stomach or I threw up, that is not the same as I did not tolerate the medicine. So that's another point with the personalized dosing thing, which I do consider, I call it on X, the personalized dosing scam, and I will still put my name behind it here on the podcast. It is a scam.
Let me follow up on that. No, just I'll note that I've written for Hims House an analysis of the legal side. It's one of the things, at least I've heard you say, was there's a moral element, which definitely comes through in a lot of your analysis. Whereas the analysis I did was simply looked at the law as it is. So that produces some potentially different conclusions. I'm not going to waste time on the podcast going through that, although I'm happy to answer any questions about it. But let me take another shot at this on a slightly different grounds. So as you probably remember, since you were very active in this, there were at least 2 broad legal issues. One of which was whether or not what Hims was doing was in compliance with federal law when it comes to compounded drugs. That's one piece of it. But there was an entirely different track, which was focused on intellectual property. And those are 2 different, overlapping, but 2 different pieces of law. Short version was, even if what Hims was doing was fully compliant with FDA regulations, despite whether or not we may say, well, they're taking advantage of a loophole, but it seems to be in compliance, at least according to my analysis. There's an entirely different argument that said that does not mean that they're exempt on intellectual property grounds. The analysis I did touch on that, but I want to kind of hear your thoughts on it.
Well, so can you reframe that for me, like more specifically?
Well, so specifically, let's say, we do an analysis and we find that that Hims is not likely to receive FDA enforcement action because they are within the letter of the law when it comes to FDA regulations with respect to compounders. However, it has been argued that Hims is nevertheless potentially in violation of the intellectual property, specifically the patent rights of Novo Nordisk. So that's an entirely different piece of law, and that Novo Nordisk could sue, not just stop a partnership, but could potentially sue Hims on patent grounds. And that was a big piece of the bear argument for quite a while. And I wasn't sure if you'd had taken any look at that.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess my first question of how to answer that is, are you talking about like within FDA, like following FDA regulations as far as like CMC and QC type stuff goes, like they're manufacturing drugs in
Yeah, well, so they're entirely different. So the FDA has frequently said that we are not in charge of patent law.
Right.
And so this is like an entirely different area of law. And there's some disagreement in the legal community about whether or not compounders, even if they are fully compliant with compounding rules under the food FDCA or whatever the acronym is for the FDA law that governs all this, that nevertheless potentially compounders could be sued just for, and so that would go directly to the argument you were just making. In many ways, what you were making was a moral argument, and to some extent an economic argument, which was, as I heard it, if we were to allow compounders to just willy-nilly compound at scale, what would that do to the economic basis for the research, which is very expensive to do? Basically, you would stop seeing pharma companies really being incentivized to do the research necessary to create new drugs if compounders can come back right behind that and just start, willy-nilly manufacturing all of it. So that's both a moral argument, but also an economic one. The counterpoint to that is that, well, pharmaceutical companies like Novo can sue on patent right grounds. So it's an entirely different area of law.
Yeah. Okay. So it encompasses both, because it's the FDA that's allowing these compounding exemptions that, so what Hims is going to say, or if they're sued, they're going to say, we followed the FDA's rules. And Nova's going to say, well, it's not just an FDA issue, it's a patent law issue. And so it kind of, the lines are going to be blurred in any case. There's an argument to be made that Hims is following the letter of the law, but they're violating the spirit of the law. I think there is a valid argument to say that that is the situation that we're in, where maybe they're following the rules as far as the compounding personalized dosing exemptions go, following the letter of the rules, but they were never intended to allow what they're doing to happen.
Right.
But like I've just kind of laid out, I actually think there's a pretty good argument to be made that they are violating the letter of the law, because these exemptions that they're claiming are exemptions for personalized dosing are not valid, in my opinion.
And so,
well, we'll see if that ends up being an issue. I can tell you, lawyers are disagreeing with each other on this issue. So I don't.
Yeah,
none of us
I would see it being a precedent-setting case. I mean, I don't think there's any way to answer any of it black and white right now.
Yeah. So lawyers are in disagreement. Just one. I want to clarify something. You said Hims is violating the letter of the law. Is that because the patients are not eligible,
right,
in your view, for the personalized doses?
That's right. You cannot tell me that somebody who's never taken a dose of a GLP-1 is intolerant to that GLP-1. Period. Okay.
And so it's not clear, like, what, like, we would need the full breakdown of Hims patients to know, like, who received the GLP-1s in the past, who hasn't.
By the way, just as an aside, I have to insert this in there. What the law actually says is not that the federal government gets to second guess the judgment of practitioners. It's actually to the discretion of the practitioner.
Right.
So these issues are not something that would be litigated. The FDA is not going to second guess a doctor's opinion on this.
And so what I was going to say is, if it is the case that the doctor, again, without influence from Hims,
right, that's an important issue,
is indicating,
which will be argued.
Sure, is indicating that the patient needs the so-called personalized dose. Like, what do you make of that?
So let's pretend we're in the courtroom and you guys just made that argument. The counter argument is going to step up and they're going to hold a chart of all of the United States personalized GLP-1s prescriptions and show you that 99% of them came from Hims and 1% of them came from other people. And it's going to be open and closed. Wow. There's no chance that every person who needed a personalized dose just happened to be getting their medicine from Hims.
Right. So we published this special report 2 weeks ago showing that Ro and Noom, despite the pact with Lilly, which supposedly forbids them from continuing to offer compounded semaglutide, are in fact still selling and prescribing compounded semaglutide. So I don't think it's like 99-1, right? Ro.
Well, then it would be a suit against all three of them.
Could be.
It would be a suit against all of them. I mean, if I'm not pro Ro doing that. It's not like an anti-Hims like stance. It's against what's happening. So if Ro and Noom and Life Med and all those people are doing this too, then it's they'll be in the courtroom too.
I want to throw out one other thing you commented on and give you an opportunity to explain it here. You focused in some of your Twitter commentary on rates of adherence for Hims. Can you tell us a little bit, for those who may not be familiar with what you're reading, what that's all about?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be really tough to analyze because the data are very loud and messy. And so where it started was, okay, so like philosophically where it starts is if Hims is saying we're doing this personalized dosing to improve patient outcomes, like the whole idea of it is that it makes things better,
Right.
then you need to have some sort of data to back that up. And so Andrew Dudum had tweeted a couple weeks ago that they had data on 90,000 patients and showed a roughly 60% adherence rate through 3 months of treatment with the personalized dosing, which he claims is better than the GLP-1 data from like the branded patented doses. Mm-hmm. And it just depends on what data set you refer to, basically. So my commentary on X initial, like my originator tweet on that was referring to the Ozempic study, the phase 3 trial. And the discontinuation rate at 72 weeks was not quite 20%. So over 80% of the patients were on the drug for well over a year. And if you compare that, obviously, to 3 months and a 40% discontinuation rate for the personalized data from Hims, that obviously is not good. And the pushback on that is that the real world data are what you should be looking at to compare. Right. And in some sense,
I saw somebody make that comment.
I mean, it's a valid point. I don't think you can rely completely on that, but it is definitely part of the picture that should be included in a discussion. If this is going to be argued in a court of law, Novo is going to come with their robust, randomized, controlled, giant multi-thousand patient studies and show that data, because it is definitionally the most robust form of data that you can have. But it's also valid to say that in the real world, things are different and we should look at real world data. So it gets a little bit more complicated because real world data outside of Hims, the patient populations can be very different. They're mostly looking at 1 year discontinuation rates. It's hard to find anything robust that actually gave you the number at 3 months, right? And so people are like, oh, look, the real world adherence rate was only 50% for real world Ozempic, whereas Hims had 60% adherence, but you're comparing 1 year to 3 months. Mm-hmm. And then, my argument, like my gut instinct argument would be, well, let's say that you lose 40% every 3 months like they did, and you end up at like 20% at 1 year. But even that's not valid because you're not going to lose patients at the same rate throughout the entire year. So it just becomes a mess of trying to compare those things. What I would say is that there will never be robust data to prove whether or not the personalized dose is superior to the commercial dose. But I would also say that I don't think any unbiased medical statistician would tell you that there's going to be a statistically significant difference if you compared those two regimens to each other.
All right. I know we have other questions. I'm going to turn it back to Jonathan. One last comment from my thought on the regulatory side. We may have a difference of opinion maybe about some of the regulatory things. I do suspect that Congress will come back to this issue at some point and probably put some fixes in place. But let me kick it to Jonathan.
I will just throw in, because we're recording, it's 12:41 p.m. on the East Coast. Andrew Dudum just responded to Novo. We were sort of waiting for that all morning. Patrick noted that it hasn't come. It just came. I can read you a few pieces if both of you would.
Yeah, let's hear it in live time.
Yeah, breaking news.
All right.
What is it?
From Andrew Dudum: we are disappointed to see Novo Nordisk's management misleading the public. In recent weeks, Novo Nordisk's commercial team increasingly pressured us to control clinical standards and steer patients to Wegovy, regardless of whether it was clinically best for patients. We refused to be strong-armed. by any pharmaceutical company's anti-competitive demands that infringe on the independent decision-making of providers and limit patient choice. We will continue to offer access to a range of treatments, including Wegovy, to ensure providers can serve the individual needs of patients. There's a little piece about how the needs of patients always come first. But thoughts on that, Adam?
That seals what they're arguing about. They're arguing about personalized dosing,
Yeah.
which I mean, I was shocked that they allowed it to continue happening, that it wasn't like a stipulation of the deal to begin with. But that, I mean, that seals the deal about what the problem is. Novo is upset with them about personalized dosing. And, you know, Hims is framing it as they are guiding people towards the FDA approved doses. And Novo's going to say they're guiding people towards unapproved doses.
Safe to say that
it's easier to take.
Safe to say that the stuff about the API being from China and therefore like not so safe is misdirection.
Yeah, no,
I was reading Novo's press release this morning.
I did. I saw that. Yeah. And, you know, I think that
misdirection entirely.
I think that they're right that some people are doing that. And I think the way that you read it, or that you can read it, it is kind of, they back out to like the generalization at that point, was my impression, is that they weren't just talking specifically about Hims. My opinion is that Hims offers a safe product.
Yeah.
But to say that they come from the same place, I think that one of the comments was that they come from the same, the API that Novo uses is from the same place as what Hims uses. I don't think that's true. I think that their API is mostly in Europe, but I don't know.
All right, so we're at we're going to record till 1. What is your schedule like today, Adam?
I've got all day.
Do you? Okay, Patrick, What is your cutoff?
I'm fine. We can run a little over.
Okay, we'll run a little over probably, but please, if we're getting close to when you need to drop, just let me know. All right, because we do have a lot on the docket. Real quickly, on the topic of Eli Lilly, many were expecting a partnership between Hims and Eli Lilly at some point. Do you think that'll ever happen? Does what happened this morning with Novo increase or decrease the likelihood that Lilly will want to step in and be the one partner with Hims?
I think it probably decreases it. I mean, I think that the pharma outlook will be that Hims has not demonstrated itself to be a good faith partner.
All right, we want to talk about Zava, and we want to talk a little bit about pharmaceutical ads. Bayside, you want to take those?
Sure. So I'll take this Zava question. You're probably very familiar with this recent international expansion. If memory serves, and you can correct me on this, I think you commented on that specifically about the 1.3 million active customers that Zava had. And I think I interpreted a tweet as you more or less wrinkling your nose at that and saying, yeah, there's not a whole lot of revenue behind that. But I'll let you speak for yourself. What do you think about that partnership?
Well, I think what's odd about it is the disconnect between that number and the revenue that they've generated, right? So I think 1.3 is a good number, but why is 1.3 million making you like $35 million a year? I mean, that's like not even a sustainable business. So there's not much information available, so I don't really grasp what's going on with that. But it's not, to me, overtly bullish to buy $35 million of revenue that you're supposedly servicing over $1 million or over 1 million people to earn. It doesn't sound like a profitable business.
Throw out the subscriber numbers and revenue then. What do you think about his decision to expand into Europe, and maybe the fact that they're buying the rails, the legal frameworks, the logistics to do that?
It's going to be tough. I mean, the European countries are poorer. They have less disposable income. Less of a kind of a consumer culture in general as well. You are looking at a collection of many countries with universally stricter laws than the United States and different laws in each country. So it's very disjointed market, different laws in every country, generally stricter. Like the advertising laws are going to be very different than they are here in the United States. And then you're trying to sell these more expensive than generic medications to people who have free healthcare. I know that there's some like exception, like it may not be easy to get into a clinic in the UK for hair loss. Like I think that's true, but it's going to be an uphill battle.
We'll see about that. I'm less certain, but we'll see. Follow-up question. Shifting gears to pharma ads. I feel like we're going a little bit backwards in the regulatory side of things, but you mentioned Super Bowl and so forth. That's part one of my question is really about how do you feel about the pharma ads, and then secondly, since we're doing policy stuff, and I think we'll shift to some other topics, but I'll throw it out there as well. RFK's out there doing his thing, make America healthy again. You're a doctor, you must be familiar with some of that.
Sure.
Kind of love to hear your thoughts on how all of those different pieces fit together, but let's start on the ad side.
Ads. I am very against the idea that Hims is allowed to advertise pharmaceutical products by name without disclosing any side effects, whereas the people who develop the drugs have to rattle off 30 seconds worth of every possible side effect that could occur. I don't think anyone reasonable disagrees with that. That is like not a fair setup, and it is just another loophole that Hims gets to advertise Ozempic.
That's what the law says.
But of course. But I think that that's a good indication that you can look at it for 30 seconds and very overtly see that it's wrong. It's a good indication that it's not going to be that way forever. And if that's part of Hims' secret sauce, then that's something that's out of threat, that they're at threat of losing. Mm-hmm. And after the Super Bowl ad, there were a few congressmen that kind of spoke up about it. That is a risk that they get put back on the same playing field as the rest of pharma. Right. More than that is maybe where things are going is a threat to direct-to-consumer advertising for pharmaceutical products broadly in general. Mm-hmm. And I have seen people poo-pooing this and saying it'll never happen, blah, blah, blah.
I was one of them.
I have historically been one of them too. But why? It's bipartisan now. I mean, Bernie's been saying it forever, but now we just had people run on the Republican ticket with that as one of the key issues as far as the healthcare part of things goes. I mean, RFK said it 100 times during the campaign trail that banning direct-to-consumer ads was one of his key issues. So we've got both sides of the aisle that are gung-ho about this now. They're talking about doing even what I would call crazier stuff, like most favored nation clauses for drug prices. This DTC ban looks like a legitimate threat, in my opinion.
All right. Turn it back to you, Jonathan.
On the topic of RFK broadly, you said you took issue with Hims' phrasing around the Super Bowl commercial, sick of the system. I think it's fair to say that RFK too is sick of the system. Around the inauguration time, around the time that Trump was picking secretary for HHS, did you see RFK as broadly bullish or bearish for Hims? And MAHA, generally?
I don't know. I don't know that I had like a strong stance at that phase about him specifically, about RFK specifically relating to Hims. Was there a consensus in the Hims house?
Cautiously optimistic that someone who is against the legacy industry, the industry that Hims is looking to upend, would be bullish at minimum for Hims, but it was never as well defined as some of the other arguments. I remain cautiously optimistic.
I have to say I was quietly not agreeing with that take.
I guess maybe the gut instinct would have been to say that he's anti-pharma, which maybe reflexively you think that means pro-Hims, but I'm not sure that's the case. I mean,
I think there are. Yeah, I think there's a compelling argument on both sides. It wasn't clear to me that the people who were extremely fired up about RFK and MAHA as being just massively bullish for Hims were making those arguments on solid ground. It seemed more speculative, but I remain cautiously optimistic for a company that really is trying to upend the legacy system. Having someone as secretary of HHS that hates that system and is on record many times hating that system could be bullish. So, but again, speculative, and we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, there's the potential benefit of shaking things up, but if stuff like the DTC ban goes through, he's shaking things up in a way that really dismantle Hims' approach to this market. So
sure. Given your background as both a physician and biotech investor, you have a unique vantage, Adam, on where the healthcare industry may be going. So before we wrap, I want to talk about the future. Let's start with AI. How has AI impacted you personally as a doctor or as a biotech investor thus far?
Not much as a doctor yet. I mean, you can use it in maybe like really rare cases where you're trying to think of like some really odd case. How do I diagnose this? And maybe just say like, give me some thoughts about what this patient is presenting with and get some stuff to review. That'll change. I mean, I'm not one of these people who's like doctors are going to be practicing the way we are now for 100 years. And as an investor, it's definitely like democratized a lot. It makes it easier to find information and like learn things really quickly as an investor. Whereas before, maybe if you're somebody at a hedge fund and you have an analyst working for you, you can say, spend 3 days on this and give me a report, and you don't do anything. You kind of have that on your laptop now. And it only takes 20 minutes. It doesn't take 3 days. So
regarding the biotech industry itself, though, how has AI shaken it up potentially?
in the biotech industry specifically, there may be some tailwinds from accelerating drug development. There's been some headlines about that recently. So they're going to kind of stop doing, and this was a recent change. They're going to stop doing a lot of the animal testing that they have to do in like the early pre-phase 1 investing. And they're going to do a lot of that pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic modeling via AI. They can basically predict how the drug is going to behave in one system better than animal models can predict. So that's going to take months off of the drug development timeline, hopefully. And there's also some discussion, nothing official yet, about the back end of that. So like reviewing a drug application takes like 9 months at this point. And they're talking about the FDA using AI to be able to review drug applications in more like 1 to 2 months. We'll see if that happens. So I think the biggest impact has been the thought that it might help accelerate timelines of bringing drugs to market.
Okay, so brings down the barrier to drug development. Along those lines, do you have a perspective on the odds that Hims would pursue drug development over a 5 or 10 year period? Say, how might AI make that possible?
I think that'd be a really bad idea for Hims. I mean, you're talking about them being a pharma company or a biotech. That's like just a completely different business model, running clinical trials, discovering drugs.
Totally.
And I don't see why they would have any more leverage than anybody else would in doing that.
Yeah. It could
do what you're good at.
Model. What I'll say is, as you've seen, Adam, there is excitement around the idea that Hims might become something like a Netflix of healthcare. Netflix, of course, started out as just the distribution channel. Recently, they've gotten into making their own movies and TV shows. You're right; it's totally different. But to truly close the circle and fulfill that analogy, I think there's an idea that Hims might get into drug development as well. So we'll see about that. Gummies.
Yay, gummies.
Gummies are clearly very future oriented.
Yeah, wow, that was a lot of excitement.
So you were pretty muted on the whole gummy drop. And by muted, I mean like you just didn't get excited at all. If anything, you were mocking those who were, which is fine. The interesting thing to me is that Andrew billed it as the future of healthcare, or a small step towards the future that he's imagining. What do you think he might have in mind, and what do you think of it?
He's taking medicine and making it taste good. It's kind of like when you give a baby some amoxicillin, it tastes like bubble gum and they're more likely to take it, I guess. I don't think it's that big of a deal. If like swallowing a pill was some excruciatingly painful process and then this gummy is the alternative to it, then sure. But I don't see how it really changes medicine in any way. And like also calling it such a novel thing, like there's a giant jar of melatonin gummies sitting next to my bed right now. It's a small molecule incorporated into a gummy. Just because it wasn't a prescription, I mean, it's probably nearly the same process to put a small molecule like minoxidil in a gummy as it is to put melatonin in a gummy. So it seems like a nothing to me.
What about the personalization angle? They're able to pull that off.
So Yeah. So what do you mean? Like, give me an example of what you're talking about, personalization.
What if we all have gummies made just for us?
How do they know it's just for you?
The same way that they're personalizing doses right now.
They're making it up, right? They don't collect any like genetic data to say you're going to respond to this drug or this drug.
Well, the
I mean,
thing
It
is,
really, the
might be
benefit.
moving in that direction.
they would be collecting genetic data via Tribe Labs.
Mhm.
Andrew just dropped a photo with, lingo, the CGM all over the boardroom table. Like they very well are moving in the direction of personalization, and I'm sorry, of having access to our blood and DNA, which enables, I think, a greater degree of personalization. So you very well might have a gummy for each of us.
Maybe, but I guess the question in that case is, what are you trying to solve for, right? Like, are you taking tadalafil and still not having an erection? And you need 6 milligrams instead of 5.
Right.
Are you taking 1 milligram of minoxidil and not having hair growth, and you need 1.2? I don't really think that those problems exist, and I don't think that those slightly different doses actually change medical outcomes. So this whole personalization thing is kind of like, yes, it is made specifically for you because you filled out this survey in a specific way, but it's not outcomes driven. It's just for the heck of it in a lot of cases. Where you could probably make a modest argument in support of it is in the convenience of taking 2 medications at once or multiple medications at once. And the benefit there is swallowing 1 pill or chewing 1 gummy as opposed to swallowing 2 pills.
Let me I would love to kind of build on that since the next question is kind of related. It's one thing to talk about what personalization looks like today, which is very similar to what you just described. It's another thing entirely to look into the future 5, 10 years from now, when perhaps the things that Jonathan was just mentioning are actually closer to the truth. And I'm curious. So, and here I'm kind of asking you to look into your crystal ball to the future as opposed to the present. What do you think is possible? Let's take Hims out of the equation, because maybe Hims is a company that can do this and maybe it's not. One of my theories was that while I didn't necessarily see Hims manufacturing these things, at least not being the developer of them, I did see it partnering with other bigger organizations that could do those things. The setback today with Novo is a setback to that thesis, but nevertheless, that was the thesis. So, but let's take Hims out of it. I mean, you know the field, you know the future. You're betting on some big future-oriented companies, presumably. And by the way, before we get to the end of the podcast, if you're comfortable doing it, I'd love to hear some of your big bets on some of the other stocks. But if you're comfortable, but let's stick to the future here. What is possible in terms of changing medication, and in terms of personalization beyond that very simple model you just described in terms of the president. If you've got the ability to get data from blood draws and medical devices and things of this nature, where you can actually design drugs that are in fact specific to an individual, is that reasonably possible within the short 5 to 10 year time frame?
Yeah, so I want to answer your question, but I also want to parlay that into a broader discussion about like this data collection stuff that this is kind of building off of. But to answer your question, yes, it is possible, and it's going to be a part of medicine. Probably already is in some respects, but increasingly so over the next few years. I just don't think that it's in any of the fields that Hims is participating in. I mean,
Which ones would it be?
Cancer is the biggest one. So cancer is going to be by far. I mean, cancer is where you can look at it and say there's already a pretty moderate degree of personalization, because we have types of cancer, like, say just colorectal cancer. We throw that in a big bucket, but really colorectal cancer, cancer of the colon, can be caused by any number of different mutations. You have like RAS, MAPK, all these different things that can be mutated. And actually there are specific drugs that target those specific mutations. So maybe 10 years ago, we throw some drugs at you and see what sticks. Now we're taking a sample of the tumor, testing what mutations it has, and giving you only a drug that specifically attacks that mutation. So cancer is an obvious one because there's so much room for improvement, for one thing. I mean, that's part of what I'm highlighting is a problem for Hims as far as personalization goes. What problem are you solving for? Like, the drugs that you're giving people work, and different doses or different formulations don't make a difference. There's a lot of room for improvement in cancer, but also it's such a heterogeneous disease. So it's caused by many different things that are appropriately treated in many different ways.
Well, that's an interesting future. I hope it comes soon. I think the only other comment I've got here, and we're running potentially short on time, so I want to keep it short. It seemed to me, and even in the cancer answer you've just given, that there's a lot of opportunity in the peptides field. And Hims has made an acquisition there. They clearly have some thoughts in the very short term. I think a lot of it's going to be focused on hormonal replacement. But there's more opportunity in peptides, and I think it happens to overlap with some of the commentary you just made. But I would love to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think a peptide, like just saying like, oh, the future of Hims is peptides, is like this very open-ended statement that really bears no meaning to me whatsoever.
Okay.
And I actually think a lot of people don't really know what peptides are or how long the pharmaceutical industry has been using them. I mean, I don't want to like turn this into a discussion about a different podcast, but when you had Antonio Linares on, he talked quite a bit about peptides, and I think drove home some misconceptions about them in general. I mean, stuff about like why can we patent GLP-1s still? And, peptides are these miracle cures and all that stuff. So I guess like my question is, right, part of my answer is to point the question back at you and say, how does Hims make money off of just peptides? Like that peptides is not a bull thesis. So discreetly, like,
well,
how do they make money off of that?
So certainly GLP-1s are peptides, and
Correct.
insulin's a peptide, and the hormone replacement, I believe, this is where I'm getting out of my depth because you're the doctor, involves the use of peptides. Sleep therapy, longevity, I've heard there's a connection to cancer. So I've yet to do my research in that area.
Yeah. So here's the big problem with all of that. You can prescribe FDA approved peptides, and then people can take them for FDA approved reasons.
Right.
But peptides are not treated like supplements, like vitamin B12, vitamin D, biotin, all that stuff. You can put that in a pill, say it's going to help you grow your hair. It doesn't matter whether or not it does because you're advertising it as supplement. Peptides are de facto considered drugs, which means that any peptide that you're putting inside of your body that is not FDA approved and prescribed to you is illegal.
Got it. That's pretty clear. That's where the partnerships may matter, but those still have to come together.
So that's another thing actually I wanted to touch on is like this idea that like Hims is going to become this like DTC partner for pharma, right? So that's part of the bull thesis as I've collected it. Pharma makes all of their money off of insurance covered, expensive branded medications. GLP-1s are the only rare exception to this, where there's such a high consumer demand because they're fantastic weight loss drugs and people want to get skinny, that some people are willing to pay high out-of-pocket costs for GLP-1s. And actually, compared to most medications, these GLP-1s are not expensive. As far as branded medications goes, $12,000 a year is nothing. So people are actually willing to pay that price on like a direct-to-consumer, not insured basis. Pharma has no reason to partner with Hims or any other DTC provider for any other type of drug because all of what they're dealing with is insurance covered medications. And Hims has said explicitly many times they have no intention of dealing with insurance. So I think any sort of upside that you envision coming from like being this DTC partner, I don't think there's a use case for it.
Got it. All right. I'm kicking this back to Jonathan.
I kind of want to ask a follow-up about peptides.
Yeah, I'm totally open to it.
I want the doctor to steel man the argument that's coming from the other side. Like, surely you've heard of the fact that Huberman and Rogan and various other extremely influential podcasters, many of whom are doctors themselves or have had doctors on the podcast, are exuberant about the future of peptides. Patrick says he hasn't, done enough research on the topic just yet to weigh in. I certainly have not done. I'm no peptide expert. What is the strongest form of the argument that peptides might be really big for Hims' business in 3 to 5 years?
The strongest argument, I guess, is that the biggest drug of all time is going to be tirzepatide, and it's a peptide. That's Lilly's Mounjaro. But
I want to look beyond GLP-1s. Huberman and Rogan are talking about, peptides
Yeah.
as GLP-1s.
Okay, so yeah, let's talk about the
Other
type of
forms
stuff.
peptides, Adam.
Right. So they're talking about peptides that they're getting like on the dark web or wherever off of some sketchy website, because it is illegal to sell non-FDA approved peptides for human use. And generally what they'll do.
The dark web exactly, but yes.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
No, seriously, like it's not the dark web, but
You're right.
And people are procuring them in ways that I don't understand. I would like to understand. So help.
Yeah, and I don't understand super well either, but you're right. It's not the dark web, although probably you could get some there. Who knows? A lot of what they're doing is these sites sell them and put like an asterisk by it that says not intended for human use, for research purpose only. And then wink, wink, it comes with a syringe, you inject it. I mean, it's hard for me to make a seal man because they're not legal. So I guess this goes back to, will Hims run clinical trials, right? Because if you want to sell peptides to humans for them to put them inside of their body, they have to be approved by the FDA and they have to come with a prescription for it to be legal. And I mean, as like against a lot of the gray area operation stuff that Hims is doing, as against a lot of that as I am, they're not doing blatantly illegal stuff. Dealing in peptides like that would be blatantly illegal. And actually pharmacies, compounding pharmacies, have been sued and lost multi-million dollar suits for selling peptides that people were using. So it's just hard to make a bull case out of it for me, because the only way that it could become a contribution to Hims' revenue would be if they were to become a pharmaceutical company, run clinical trials, get them FDA approved, get patents, and then sell them as like branded drugs that cost a lot of money. I mean, the only reason that pharmaceutical companies are able to make their money back is because they sell their really, really, really expensive medicines that are covered by insurance. So none of this fits within the Hims business model. So the peptide thing, I think, is just like vaporware as far as Hims is concerned. And that's not to me saying that I don't think peptides do things. I mean, they have physiologic activities. I just don't think it's relevant.
I have to ask this really quick question. Andrew Dudum, when we even interviewed him, and I asked the question, said, would you ever consider going to the insurance-based model? And he said, no way. But
I mean,
they could change their mind.
Okay, well, I guess. But then your thesis is, oh, Hims is the next big pharmaceutical company. Look out, Eli Lilly. Like, pharma companies have been developing peptides for decades, and they've been making blockbuster drugs out of peptides for decades. I mean, there's this like notion that I think came up on the Linares podcast that like GLP-1s were the first ones. Not the case at all. Like, when there is some opportunity to turn a peptide into a drug, pharma's been doing that for a long time.
All right, 2 questions to close. Number 1, you've gone short to long with Hims before. What would have to be true for you to turn long again? Deep sighing, Adam.
Yeah, it's a hard question. I mean, I guess it's kind of a cheating question because I was trading it. I mean, I was long the stock, but when you say go long, like, it implies that I'm bullish on the company long term, and that was never really the case. I guess the nature of one of your tweets suggested to me you might be somewhat bullish long term. Or not.
Based on the last 70 minutes, I don't have those illusions anymore. But
yeah,
again, what would have to be true?
They would have to find a way to make a lot of money. Their verticals would have to just like take off, because I don't think that they deserve a high multiple, which is something I think we could talk more about.
Yeah, that was my final question.
I think they need to just bring in like just bags and bags and bags of revenue. And I don't think it's plausible.
Let's go to valuation.
Yeah.
Let's go to price targets. You're short right now. What is your price target, and how do you think about the right multiple?
It's probably in the low 40s right now, based on where it was whenever we started talking.
We're 43.
43. Yeah. It's, I mean, who knows? I think it goes to the 30s in the relatively near term. This Novo thing is materially negative, and it's a high momentum stock. It could even go to the 20s, which is where it was before the Novo news was good. I don't know. That's not like long term. I think it's probably worth less than that. Where I will cover is not where I think it's going to be worth, if that makes sense. Like, I'll cover higher than I think it should trade. Hopefully I'll cover it this week. But like, I think a more useful way to approach the question, or way to approach my answer to the question, is like, what do you think Hims is worth, right? The big variable in that is the multiple that Hims sports. And the fork in the road for what multiple Hims carries is, do you consider it a tech company, or do you consider it a consumer goods company? And I think through and through, Hims is a consumer goods company that should trade at a consumer goods multiple. So examples would be, I mean, like, if you look at the big ones, it would be stuff like Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Coke. You're talking about mid twos to Coke, I think, is somewhere around like 6 on
not somebody like Amazon.
Well, Amazon's a tech company now. AWS, I mean,
sure, okay,
yeah, and also
fair enough. AWS, that's true.
It's a huge chunk of their business, and they've got
some of their business is undoubtedly techy. Didn't start that way
for Hims,
for Amazon.
Oh, for Amazon, yeah. And so I look at Hims as a company who uses technology and does not in any way sell technology. I mean, Burger King uses technology, but they sell hamburgers.
Right.
Hims uses technology to maybe inform the prescription behaviors of their physicians and to collect data and to advertise effectively. But what they're selling is still generic drug products. So I do think that they deserve a consumer goods multiple. I think one argument against that I have encountered is like this, like the value of their data. Is that something that you guys have? I think I've probably heard it on the podcast.
Well, I have a couple. Like, what about the margins for one?
So, well, it depends on what margins you're talking about, right? So sure. Sometimes I've heard people refer specifically to the cost of a generic drug and what the markup is to that. But then you have to start talking about consumer acquisition cost, the huge chunk of their money that they spend on advertising, and put that all into one. And if you put all that into one, I don't think their margins are that good. And here's how I support that. If you look at the price to sales revenue, they're only, and the numbers that I had in my head were from 64 what it was trading at today. So like thinking about these multiples being when Hims was trading at 64 coming into today, their price to sales multiple was about 6x, which puts them at the very high end of consumer goods multiples.
Right. So today we're at 4, but either, in the 4 to 6 band is not terribly different in my view.
So that's mostly in line, slightly high end of consumer goods multiples, but their price to earnings, which reflects profitability, was way higher than comps like Coke or Unilever or P&G. It was in the 90s coming into today, whereas those others are in the 20x range. And so what that says is their revenue is very similar to these companies per market cap, but their profit is not.
Right. And that's due to the growth rates, right? 111% year over year in Q1, numbers that Unilever does not.
I mean, admittedly declining toward 30%, but 30 to 40%, but 30 to 40% growth is still pretty darn good.
Yeah, it is. But the problem is a lot of it is GLP-1 and it's going to be lost. And
well, Adam, we've not established that today. We've established that you believe they are illegally compounding, and that the partnership with Novo Nordisk is now
sure,
gone, right? But it's not.
I will stand by the statement that it will be lost.
Branded Wegovy was, that large of Q2 revenue, right? So it's. We will see what happens in the courts.
So yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. You're saying they're still going to be able to do this personalized thing. My point is though that it's not going to be branded forever. It's going to be a generic drug someday, and that margin is going to be gone. Whether they continue to do personalized dosing for now or not, ultimately this GLP-1 boost that they've got, someday that drug is going to be generic, and their margin is going to shrink because everybody else is going to offer it generic, and insurance is going to cover it.
Yeah, we'd need to look into the margins, 2-3 years ago before they were into GLP-1s, but the margins are still pretty compelling on the core business. That is hair loss, like oral weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because so they're selling generic drugs at a markup. I think part of the issue is that it gets harder as time goes along as well. Like there's a lot of industries or a lot of these businesses where the bigger you get, the better your margins become. And I don't see a path for that being the case for Hims. Like, and I could be wrong, but the way I look at it is they've probably already pretty much saturated the low-hanging fruit of like the hair loss and erectile dysfunction market, right? The people who are like susceptible to those types of ads have already gone through the algorithm and gotten on the program. Maybe some fell off. So the more of the TAM that you take up, the total addressable market that you take up, the smaller the remaining pool to gather from is. Growth becomes harder for Hims. And the margin, where's the margin compress? Like where does the margin get easier for them?
I have a slight counter argument to that, but
I am sincerely interested in hearing it.
But I'm not going to take hardly any time on this. Simply that I think it's true, frankly, that there's a certain degree of saturation, but what that leaves you with is, first of all, a moat against new entrants into the field, because all of the players in that field are dealing with the same economics. Secondly, it gives advantages to economies of scale. The biggest player is going to be most able, because they'll have lower level cost than other companies with smaller number of customers, and thus better able to compete in a semi-saturated. And I say semi-saturated because there's always new people entering the market or losing their hair.
Sure. Sure.
Anyway, I'm turning back to Jonathan, but I would love it if let's imagine, for the sake of argument, that some people are watching this and going, man, he knows his stuff. I'm having second thoughts about Hims. What are some promising alternatives that they should be looking at? We want to know.
There's no way. Small cap pre-revenue biotech is like the riskiest subsector of the market.
All right.
I'm going to recommend something, and it's going to be down 90%.
And then you'll be hearing about it.
And then I'll be lit up. So no way. I don't think it's even an appropriate sector for a lot of people to even spend time thinking.
Fair enough. I thought I'd give it another shot.
Adam, final question. Is that Columbus Circle behind you? What am I looking at?
This is downtown Indianapolis.
Got it. Okay.
Maybe in the 40s.
Yeah. Are you in the Midwest?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
All right. Well, if it was Columbus Circle, if you were in New York, I would have invited you to the Hims $100 party.
Oh, yeah.
Which unfortunately is further away, I think, today than I expected.
Oh, I'm glad you reminded me of that, because I almost forgot. So I alluded to it on X, and I had a gift for the Hims House people. And so my vision for this gift, it hasn't been delivered yet, so I have to show you a picture of it. Okay. But if you are willing to give me an address to send you this can be either handed out as a raffle gift at the $100 party.
Love it.
I think the deal should be, if within a year from today, if it hits $100, it gets raffled off at the party. If it's a year from now and it hasn't hit 100, then do a Hims House auction and give like the $20 somebody's willing to pay for that.
I love it. By the way, I have a suggestion. Once you get it, Jonathan, you should hang it on that wall behind you where you have no photographs hanging.
I'm just going to make an appearance on every Hims House podcast.
Thank you for calling attention to my Spartan apartment, Patrick.
For those listening on Spotify without visual components, the gift is a dartboard with my face on it. And the top says Hims House, and the bottom says "In Dudum We Trust."
Awesome. Yeah, well, you get points for having a good sense of humor.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as do you guys. I mean, not just good sense of humor, but also just like good faith discussions with people who are on the bear side. That
Yeah.
is like that's rare, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate that, Adam. We will we'll be finding probably the foremost dart bar in New York City
Okay.
for our $100 party. I can't wait. We are a little further today than I thought, but yeah, just wanted to say thank you for coming on and yeah, sharing your perspective on the stock. Very valuable to hear. So
Yeah. Thank you guys too.
This has been episode 36. Thank you so much, Adam May.